Because when I travel, I always travel with Dos Equis.
Now, see, but now, do you think it's the beer or the hat that makes you the most interesting?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well,
You sound really hoarse. You're not done, Shelby.
you just cannot slip anything past you know, you read that, his biography, he says, I've been a lawyer, a sawyer, inventor, singer, reporter, provocateur, thespian, gourmet cook, wine snob, race car driver, fishing guide, explorer, dreamer, storyteller, and writer.
Who is that?
Whoa, and I think, what about me? I do some writing. I like Dos Equis beer, you know.
I bought this just for you.
Well, the last item on that list is a writer, and something tells me that this for you has been more than just checking a box. It goes a little deeper than some of the other endeavors you've had in your life. So why don't you tell us how you undertook this phase of your life?
This actually happened, it's my grandchildren's fault, my adult grandchildren's fault. They're both in their late 20s now. I've been a writer all my life. I was a newspaper writer before I was a lawyer. Realized I didn't have any talent and went to law school. And then practiced law for 50 years. And I actually still have my license, so if you need a lawyer, I can refer you to somebody. I'm a recovering lawyer now. But when my grandkids were in, I think, third and fourth grade, I gave them a Christmas present, and it was called Thursdays with Grandpa. And I picked them up after school on Thursdays all through the school year, took them to Cold Stone Creamery to ruin their dinners, and told stories. Made up stories as we went along. They became characters in the stories. Their mom's here tonight, by the way. It's my daughter Heidi right up here in front. We did that and just had a ball. And when they became teenagers a little later, they said, Grandpa, did you ever write them down? And I went, no. So I decided I should write something. And here we are 4 books later working on a whole bunch more. So I made a vow to myself to publish my first book by the time I was 75. Well, I was 75. I was about 10 days short of my 76th birthday when my first book was published. And that was Cloud Warriors, which, by the way, is going to be released again in only ebook form, either by the end of this year or at the beginning of next year. I bought the rights back from a UK publisher. And I reread the book, I edited it. It's one of the good things I did while I was in Phoenix over the last week. And I edited the book. I forgot what a damn good book it was. So I highly recommend it to everybody.
Why? Okay, well, you could classify Cloud Warriors as paranormal, but primarily I would put you in the mystery genre for your book so far. Why mysteries? I mean, how do you make the jump from cool stories for grandkids to mysteries?
Well, the cool stories for grandkids were mysteries too. We did them usually in a pirate setting. We had space pirates, and we had the old 17th century pirates, and we had to link them together, and we figured out how to do that through storytelling. But they always had some sort of mystery in it, and the kids were always, my grandkids, were always the main characters in figuring out how to solve the mysteries. I was just the captain of the ship that sort of stumbled around and found the mysteries. But mysteries, lawyers, lawyers think they're smarter than everybody else. So they think that if there's a mystery, they can solve it. And if you can solve it, then you can certainly make one up. And then, so, I don't know, that's just how it came down, I guess. I like mysteries, I read mysteries. I like mysteries and thrillers, and I like historical fiction, and I write all three, and I kind of blur the lines of the genres.
Well, tell us, I agree. Cloud Warriors, I enjoyed that thoroughly. That was your first book. Tell us a little bit about that and a little bit about the paranormal aspects of it as well.
Well, the interesting thing about Cloud Warriors, for those of you who haven't seen it or read it, it's a story. All my books have some sort of historical underpinning, some event, some anomaly in history. This one happens to come from, I spent a lot of time in Peru thanks to my wife, Kathy, in the front row corner there. Kathy worked for a NGO and for 9 years spent time in Peru, and I got to tag along with her. And I became enamored with the Amazon culture. One of the things that I learned along the way is that among the tribes or conglomerations of tribes that the Amazons conquered, Incans conquered, were a tribe called the Chachapoyas, which lived in the clouds at the top of the Andes Mountains. What made them unique was that they were fair-skinned, blue-eyed, and blonde-haired, which is kind of wired for that area of the country. And so I wrote a story about that, used that as the historical underpinning, and took out my wrath about the greed of the pharmaceutical industry in that book. It's my fictional take about beating up the pharmaceutical industry. And the good news about being a writer, this is part of getting, I think, letting go of Minnesota nice. You've experienced it, Brian, so we have to be nice because we're from Minnesota. But if you're a writer of mysteries, you can kill people. Sometimes those who really deserve it, but you can't do it.
That's true. I mean, I killed off my old CEO once. And, I made it fictionalize it enough so that I wouldn't get in trouble, but made it accurate enough so there also wouldn't be any doubt. And, it was a little self-indulgent, but what's the use of this if you can't have a little fun, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, anyway, where was I? I was rambling. I don't know where I was in this whole thing, but I want to recognize the authors. We have a whole ton of authors here, everybody. Paul Simonson, Michael McBride, Ron Hanberg, all the way from South Africa, Stanley Trollope, Karen Anderson, Chris Norbury, Christy Belcamino, Michael Ferrisy.
We're missing anybody?
Did we miss anybody? And if I do, I'm sorry. But I think all of these people are just awesome writers. And if you haven't met them before, some of them you've seen at Minnesota Mystery Night. Most of them I think you've seen at Minnesota Mystery Night. But you really ought to take the time to chat with these folks after we're done here tonight, and find their, go buy their books. It's pretty awesome. Anyway, where were we?
Well, let's lead into your next books then. Cloud Warriors. You featured a character who was psychic and got involved with some psychic phenomena in the course of the story. And that character also appears in each of your subsequent books, the Reaper, the Sower, and the Judgment Day. Now, did you envision a trilogy when you wrote the first book?
No. The first book was a standalone. The Reaper was a story that the historical foundation is. Kathy and I were in Barcelona. I've been a fan all my adult life of an avant-garde painter named Joan Miró, who's a Catalonian Spaniard modernistic painter and sculptor. And we went to his museum, one of his museums, and we found out that in 1937 he painted something for the Paris World Exposition for the Spanish Pavilion there. And when it disappeared, or when they tore the pavilion and the World's Fair down, the painting disappeared and it's never been found. And the name of the painting in English is The Reaper. It's called, El Segador is the name in Catalan. So since I've been a fan and the painting went missing, I thought, what an opportunity to write a book. And so I started a book on this, thinking I was writing a standalone book like Cloud Warriors was. And I'll be danged if I got to the end of the book and there was a murder. And you can't end a book with a murder. So you got to write a second book to try to figure out who did it, right? So the first book was called The Reaper because of the name of the painting.
I should interject here, history was what drew me to the Reaper. I don't know a ton about art, but I know a bit about history, and it's wild. You have cameos in this book by Ernest Hemingway, Adolf Hitler, and Pablo Picasso, just to get things started, you know. And you've got the Spanish Civil War as a backdrop, and so if you do like the historical fiction, that's a good one to start with. But then you can't just leave this painting.
Yeah.
You can't leave well enough alone. Okay.
And then along came Jones. No, that's something else. I should mention that actually The Reaper is two novellas under one cover, because the first half is what happened in the last week of the 1937 Paris World's Fair and the competing interests for that painting. And then it fast forward to 2009 and how that still missing painting then becomes the focal point of an ongoing conflict between a very powerful woman and her estranged son, who she abandoned at age 4. And that's where the trilogy starts, really. What happened was that I won't go into that because that's going to blow the whole thing, isn't it? Yes. All right. So anyway, at the end of the second part of that book was this murder, and then came the sower. So I put the Reaper and the sower in inverse order of ordinary biblical progression. But the sower came along, and the sower is really the story of sower is a pure hard-boiled mystery. It starts with the murder, the recap of the murder that ended the Reaper. And then the whole book is spent trying to solve the murder. And the protagonist is a transgender woman private detective who is the head of an all-women's detective agency located in St. Paul. It was a fascinating book to write. I have been befriended by and become really good friends with a transgender woman that I dedicated the book to, and she guided me through it and educated me and corrected all my innocent faux pas and mistakes. We ended up, Ellie Krug is her name. She has her own radio show, and she's a real advocate for gender equality and LGBTQ plus equality. But the book was fascinating in the sense that for me to write it was about. It's not a book about anybody that's on that letter scale. It's a mystery where the person who is trying to solve it just happens to be transgender. And you get a little different kind of angle on the whole thing. Nobody's championing anything. Nobody's trying to make anything better in the world, at least not overtly. But you have a situation where you realize that a person who is transgender has a whole lot of different kind of things that they have to deal with and consider than we do, than straight people do. So it was an interesting book, and lo and behold, they caught the killer. Or at least we think they caught the killer. There was an arrest at the end of the book. Now, so I wrote the sequel to The Reaper with the Sower, thinking that was the end of it. And then I got about 100 pages from the end, and I realized the story wasn't over. So I had to write Judgment Day. And Judgment Day is another interesting experience from a writer's standpoint. It is a story that is told from the viewpoint of a person who has been charged with murder, who has a mental disability, and who is also a celebrity.
Careful now.
Okay.
Don't give it.
Don't give it away. Okay. But it's the sort of my social theme that ran through that is dealing with the way our legal system does an extremely poor job of being equal to all people, and some of the people who benefit are those who are wealthy and famous, and some of the people who do not benefit or get any equality are those who are LGBTQ, those who are mentally have mental disabilities. It's so that the idea, wholly apart from the story of this person who was charged with murder, the whole idea behind the book, or that ran through my head anyway, was to try to explore a little bit how our legal system treats that kind of a situation, where we had a combination of a celebrity, the celebrity part being she was the first U.S. senator, elected U.S. senator ever charged with murder in the history of the United States. And so that's the celebrity part. She was also a billionaire. The other part is that she struggled with mental illness. And so it's the combination of things.
And is a very unsympathetic
Oh yeah,
character.
yeah, she's a bitch.
No, don't use that word.
Oh, okay. Oh no, that's right. I can't use that word, can I? Oops.
I don't think we've ever talked about this, but I know I started out writing books with not a lot of idea other than to entertain people, to make it an entertaining book. But I found from the very beginning that I wanted to inject a element of thoughtfulness into this, and if not outright advocacy, but to raise some issues and it sounds really pompous, maybe even to enlighten some people on occasion. I'm wondering how conscious a process has that been to you? I mean, when you write about Ronnie Brilliant, I mean, is this did you go into this with the idea of maybe wanting to talk about people who are misunderstood and marginalized?
I did. As I said, there's two things that always that are common among all my books. Number one is the historical underpinning. Number two is there is always some sort of social thread that runs through it. Something that I try to shine a light on without being overt. I'm not trying to, thump the Bible, so to speak, to try to bring any, but I found that through fiction, and you have too, I know, Brian, through fiction, you can raise an issue and have a considered, reasonable, rational conversation with people, where if it was not a fictional situation, it would be too hot for people to have a conversation about. People would be up in each other's face, but through fictional representation of the situation, you take, in this case, a transgender woman, and you make her a private detective doing the best she can do, and suddenly you can have a conversation about the whole LGBTQ community with people who have, sometimes, if you tried to do that and you used real life situations, you'd never have a rational conversation with. So that was a really long answer to a really short question. In
other words, yes.
Yes,
okay.
Yeah, that was the answer. But I want to switch the spotlight just for a minute here, because Brian wrote a book, one of his falls books, and I want you to talk about it a little bit, because you actually predicted history.
Unfortunately, I did, and I take no pleasure whatsoever in that. My book, Nightfall, written in 2018, the central event of the book was a police shooting of an African-American man, a civil rights leader, actually, and that turned out to be not quite as focal as it appeared to be, but anyway, we got to the end of the story. My character, Penn, had solved that case and solved a more recent murder, the one she'd actually been hired to. This was a historical police shooting that went back about 30 years or so. And at the end of the story, and this was a story of a politician creating racial hatred and chaos and ultimately violence for electoral gain, which that in itself runs kind of uncomfortably close to some of what we see today. But anyway, that ultimately quiets down after the murder is solved and so on. And Penn's client says to her, he says, have we learned anything from this, or are we just sweeping it under the rug? And Penn, who is not a native of Minneapolis, not really familiar with that situation on the ground, her line at the time was, from where I stood, the brooms had come out in full force. And of course, we know what happened only 2 years later here in Minneapolis. And I was horrified, as everyone was, but I can't say I was very shocked. And it's when we were talking to our friend Tom Combs, he's an author who's an ER doc, and he wrote a book at about the same time about the fentanyl crisis. And we did a panel discussion at the library called Ripped from the Headlines. And sometimes it gets a little uncomfortable to do that. And I take no pleasure in having seen this as a problem that had yet to be solved. And of course, it's still yet to be solved. But that was, I didn't set out to do that.
Was that paranormal? That you had that clairvoyance to see it?
No, it was dumb luck or dumb bad luck, however you want to look at it.
Anyway, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot with that, but I know that book means a lot to you, and that was one of those times where fiction sort of led history, unfortunately. Does anybody have questions? I mean, this is a lovely little dialogue going on up here, but I'd rather answer questions.
I have a question.
Oh, not you. Okay, all right.
Asking anyway.
Okay.
So I was just really intrigued by the character's mental illness. I don't know if we're allowed to. You want to keep that a secret as to what it was, but I mean, just how did you research? How did you authenticate that character that that she had these multiple personalities and what that looked like for her? And what it felt like for her, because everybody else could kind of see it, but she couldn't see it.
It was very interesting. Our youngest daughter, just a couple years younger than 80, has a PhD in forensic psychology, and she was my go-to. And then she referred me to several other people in the discipline, psychologists and psychiatrists, that I talked to, interviewed, to try to get a feel for what this was about. Plus, I did a ton of reading about DID, and it was really interesting because in an earlier book, and in fact the first book of the trilogy. A character has a brain injury and goes into a coma, and so I did a lot of brain research, brain trauma research, and this was a really interesting overlay to that, and what, and I don't pretend to be any kind of expert of any sort, but the one thing that seems to be consistent through it all is we don't know. I mean, every brain is individual, and every brain reacts differently, and whether you're talking about someone who has, who becomes a paraplegic or quadriplegic because of brain damage, or someone who can talk to the other side, like Carrie Waters, my character that has run through all 4 of my books, or somebody who has crazy people running around inside their head, multiple crazy people running around inside their head. Terry's going like this, like she's been there, knows the other. But, you know, the research that I've done is sort of along that whole line, and it's just fascinating to find out what not only we don't know, you and I don't know, but what, you know, the professionals don't know. And it's still a universe that is barely touched, I think, in terms of research and understanding of what this is all about.
Can you explain, please, for those who don't know what DID is?
It is dissociative identity disorder. We used to call it multiple personalities. I don't know where it got the new title or why, but DID that's what it is. It means that you have a situation where someone has more than one personality, and they are distinct, and you know, they're more than just being different levels of being a jerk, you know, that sort of thing. And sometimes they don't communicate with each other. The person has no idea. I mean, the dominant personality is not aware of the other personalities that the body carries around with it. Sometimes they're all in conversation with each other. I will say that Judgment Day has added a twist to the milieu of that the DID, because there is a twist in Judgment Day, and I'm not going to tell you what it is. There's a twist in Judgment Day that has not appeared, as far as I know, in any journal or any article or any study about DID. So I'm going to let you read the book and find out what it is.
Breaking new ground. Well, why don't we shift gears a little bit and talk about your writing process a little bit, and let's get this out of the way first. Plotter or pantser?
Oh, pantser, absolutely. For those of you who don't know the difference, plotters are those who outline. My friend Brian here outlines ad nauseum. and pantsers are those who don't have the patience to outline and sit down at the typewriter, have a general idea of a story, and start writing. We throw away a lot of prose because we find out that the story leads us down paths that don't make any sense or we don't like or whatever. But I'm a pantser. I love the adventure of finding out what's happening in the story as much as the reader does. Because honestly, I start a book and I have no idea what the ending is. I have never started a book knowing what the ending was going to be. And sometimes it's really fun. Sometimes you get done and you say, oh, poop, and you throw it away. And you let the book sit for 5 years, and then you go back and rewrite it again. That's what happened to The Reaper.
Did you ever start laughing at yourself?
Laughing at myself. I berate myself a lot. I'm not humorous enough, I don't think, to laugh at myself. Yeah, I do. I mean, it come up with things that are just so dumb. Tell you a quick story on that along. I wrote The Reaper actually before I wrote Cloud Warriors. And a weird thing happened on the way to doing this, and it happens to pantsers. I'm about 150 pages into the book, and suddenly the story takes off and goes, choo! And I thought, what the hell? And I just followed it. When the book finally ended, it was 420 some pages long. I was so proud of it. I was sure it was the next great American novel. I gave it to about 50 people. I was so excited about it. And they all got back to me almost identically and said, the 150 pages that you began with were pretty good. After that, it got really boring. So I threw the book in a drawer, along with several other books that I'd started that I knew weren't any good. And I wrote Cloud Warriors. And while I was waiting for Cloud Warriors to work its way through the publication system and the distribution system, I pulled the Reaper back out of the drawer and I rewrote it. And the cool part of it is that within about 10 days after it was released and June of 2019, it was an Amazon bestseller.
How cool is that?
Yeah, that was nice.
Oh, should we clap for that?
I forgot,
Thank you.
forgot the applause sign, so.
You're not allowed to mention Amazon in the bookstore though.
Yeah, that's true.
The A word, yeah. we have-
It was a bestseller.
So with my vast knowledge I've just learned, this is what's going on. In his DID planner brain, it figures the whole story out and slowly feeds it into the other brain, making him think he's a pantser.
Beware of the horse head at the end of your.
Oh, the Godfather.
That's an interesting concept, Tom. I'm not so sure.
Other questions? Anybody?
Tell us,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have one. If you go on to write other books, which I assume you are, will you bring any of your characters or ideas forward into the new book? You said that they were kind of always in your head. And I'm wondering, do you abandon them entirely, or do you carry some of this forward?
You know, characters are funny things, people, spirits, objects, warts. They follow you. They become your family. They become, they invade your thought processes. So the answer is yes, I've started another book. And it will include, it will include probably my two favorite characters, or at least two of my favorite characters from my previous books. It'll include Ronnie Brilliant, who is the transgender detective, and it will include Henri Hawk, who is the ultimate villain. He just has something. If you've ever watched Blacklist on television, James Spader plays this world villain that is all powerful, and Henri Hawk is like that. He doesn't have the same all powerful worldwide, and he's a lot cooler than James Spader. But those two are in the book as I begin it, and who else will show up? I don't know. The other thing that happened, this is really interesting, that's what happens to pantsers, okay? I've got this all-female detective agency called the
Monet.
Thank you, the Monet Detective Agency. And there's a long story behind that, why it's called named after a painter. But I've got this detective agency, and I start the book, and suddenly the detectives get in a fight, and we're on the verge of having the detective agency break up. There was no intent of doing that when I started writing. What'll happen after I resume? I haven't touched it for a little while, but when I resume, I don't know. I don't know if the detective agency is toast, or if it'll come back together again. But so anyway.
All right. Should we talk acronyms? Let's talk acronyms.
Okay. Sure.
Okay. We have been doing some things in the last year or two, which have been dominated by two misleadingly similar acronyms, and Chris knows what they are. Let's start with the one called MMW, shall we?
Oh, that's Midwest Mystery Works. Midwest Mystery Works is a cooperative of 5 independent authors, 3 of whom are here tonight. Uno, dos, tres, Chris Norberg in the back row. And we got together and decided to do some joint marketing.
Now, admittedly, there may have been some alcohol involved in developing this idea.
There certainly was before he decided to join the group.
Yeah, Chris has kept us on the straight and narrow. So, yeah. But what we have, we do things together. We do some marketing together, and we have just started to put together an anthology.
Well, let's go in order here. Let's take. We formed this club with Chris Norbury and also John Rogers and Julie Holmes. We're thankful we got Julie to join. Otherwise, we might as well just have called ourselves the old guys. But we have undertaken two, well, I think when we came up with this idea, we never explicitly agreed that each of us got to come up with one crack brain idea for the group, but that's the way it turned out. And the first one turned out to be not so crack brain at all. Let's talk about the other acronym, which is MMN.
That's Minnesota Mystery Night. And I think everybody, maybe with the exception of the two gentlemen in the back row over here, have been at Minnesota Mystery Night. Many of you have been the featured authors at Minnesota Mystery Night or will be in the future. Minnesota Mystery Night took over, there was an organization or an event called the Bookstube at the Bierstube that took place in Hastings for about 15 years. And COVID sort of deep sixed that. And so when the COVID sort of waned, we got together and decided to pick up the gauntlet, and we started Minnesota Mystery Night in October of 2022. So we've been at it for just a little more than a year. It happens the third Monday of the month at Axel's Restaurant in Mendota. We bring in a top-notch mystery author, most of them from Minnesota. There's a lot of mystery authors from Minnesota, which I attribute to Minnesota Nice and the ability to kill people on paper. And then we put them in conversation with really interesting people. This coming Monday night, we have Chris Hewsome, a very active author of police procedurals and cozy mysteries from Buffalo, Minnesota, in conversation with Colin Nelson, who spent 40 years in the Hennepin County criminal justice system and is a writer. And then in December, on the December 18th, we have Laura Childs, who is probably the most renowned local cozy mystery writer, in conversation with Lorna Landvik, which promises to be an awesome night. So that's what we do, and it's been real successful. And the next iteration of it is we're working with a couple of independent radio stations right now to turn it into a live radio show. So we hope that's going to happen in 2024.
For those of you who haven't been there, it's a blast. It is just genuinely fun. We hope you will come. And Rob has done a great job putting this together, spearheading it, finding Axel's, coming up with this conversation format, which works so well. We had Christy along with Wendy Webb for one of our, that was just a dynamite evening. And it's just, and now we're working on some new horizons for that as well.
We had Ron Hanberg back here in conversation with the guy who you're supposed to be, Don Shelby. Don Shelby, by the way, sends his regrets. Don, as many of you probably know, is starring in a thing called Love Letters out at Chanhassen Dinner Theater, and he had agreed to be my conversation partner a long time ago. And then Chanhassen added more nights because this thing is so popular, and one of them was tonight, but it's not because Don has some health issues. He is struggling with some health issues right now. Ron, you can probably talk to that more than I can, but the fact is they've canceled the Love Letters shows for November, December. They are going to pick it up again in January and February if Don's health allows. So that's the explanation. Brian was kind enough and a good enough friend at the last minute to say, do I have to? But he did.
And I heard there was Dos Equis involved. But I should say that the evening that we had Ron and Don Shelby, it was one of the most gripping evenings I have spent. That was just an amazing conversation that they had. Well, shall we talk about crack brain idea number 2?
Sure, yeah, that's your crack brain idea.
That was mine, yeah. We each got one.
Right? I think Ron was gonna.
Oh, yeah, Ron, did you have?
Pardon me?
Did you want to say something about yourself or Don or your new book? Or
I haven't talked to Don
recently, but the genesis was he and Barbara, who had a cruise tour in Europe, and when he came back, he was suffering both pneumonia and COVID, and was hospitalized for several days. I've not communicated within the last, but I know at least some of the performances of love letters were canceled because of his health issues. He's had heart problems, he's had open heart surgery in the past, but he keeps coming back, and Dave Nimmer, who's my other best friend, and I continue to try to persuade him to give up some of the many things that he's involved in, all well-being. And I think finally now he's starting, after this latest health scare, to pull back from some things. And it didn't surprise me that he wasn't going to be here. I assumed it was because of those things. But yeah, we had a wonderful night at Mystery Night, and so.
It was a great night.
It really was. Well, scheme number 2, as we had begun to talk about here, was a thought that we had for all 5 of us in our little club with our secret handshake and everything. We decoder ring, yeah. Right. We are going to write a story jointly, all 5 of us, and we are going to use all of our 5 of our fictional detectives working together in the same story. And this has proved to be, I don't think anybody will dispute, significantly more work than we had anticipated, harmonizing all of the, but I think we have a terrific premise for it. And I think I can truthfully say everybody is hooked. We are just absolutely having a blast with this, and imagining how our characters would interact, whether they would like each other or not, or how they would operate. And it's we hope to get that done by the end of next year. And anyway, that's like I said, there might have been a bit of drinking involved with that one too.
You think about it, you got 5 authors, none of whom, of course, are type A personalities, and you have 5 characters or protagonists out of their books. Think Charlie Chaplin in that movie where the cops are all running around and they meet at that intersection and run into each other. This is where we are. So.
But it's a whole lot of fun. More questions, anybody? Yeah, Chris.
I gotta ask a question. You can go on the record officially. Who saw the road sign on Interstate 90 heading west first? You or Brian Freeman? Yeah, that's a kind of an inside joke, but
Yeah.
I finally figured it out.
No, actually, I beat Brian to that one.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
And does he know that?
Well, we've talked about it. There's probably dispute over who had that first. But the character that runs through the trilogy, who is the woman that is featured in Judgment Day, is named Magnolia Canarenzi, and it is explained that that's not her real name. And back when she was in her early 20s, late teens, she spent the better part of a decade in a drug-induced state, and a better part of the decade dodging in and out of legal skirmishes. And she was, in essence, she was kicked out of the Twin Cities by a judge who said to either go to jail or to leave. And she decided to leave, but she didn't have any money, so she hitched a ride on the back of a Harley, whose owner and driver, she hadn't any idea who he was. But she hitched a ride on the way to Sturgis. And on the way to Sturgis, on I-90, there is a road sign that says if you get off on this exit, if you go this way, you go to Magnolia. And if you go this way, you go to Canarenzi. And she saw that, and still coming down off a drug-induced situation, and said, I like that. I think I'll be Italian royalty. And so she decided that her name was going to be Magnolia Canarensi, and that's the name she adopts, and that's the name that appears in the book, the trilogy. And she's the one that's a bitch.
Well, we're just about out of time. We should talk about what's next. What's the next project?
Okay, next project. Well, next project, we've kind of talked about it already.
Well, we've got our next joint project,
Our
but
next
we're all
joint project.
individually
We're-
continuing with
yeah.
what we do as well.
We're working on what the trilogy the anthology is got a working title of Fivefold because there's 5 of us. That's pretty unique. But for me personally, I have started this novel. It wasn't the novel I thought I was going to start actually, but it's a thriller that is a combination of 2 story thread ideas that I've had for quite a while. Part of it is art theft, and part of it is domestic terrorism. And those are the 2 main freaky things that run through it. That it will take place mostly in southern Minnesota, and but some of it always takes place somewhere in Barcelona or Paris because of Hawk, who lurks around everywhere, but hangs out in Barcelona for the most part. So that's what I'm working on. I've still got in the hopper First Witch, which is a book that needs to be written.
But you need to go to Ireland.
But I need to go to Ireland. I mean, it's, I got to wait for a year where I need a tax write-off so that I can write off my trip to Ireland. But First Witch is the story of the woman who would have been burned at the stake in Ireland and would have been the first witch of Ireland because she poisoned 4 husbands, and the church looked askance at that whole idea. But she escaped because she had friends in high places. But there's a little story that goes with that. And most of you probably, or many of you have heard it, but I'll tell it anyway because I like it. And maybe this will bring this to an end. Kathy and I were in Ireland in 2016, and that's where we found this story. And there is a place in Kilkenny called Keitler's Inn. Keitler's Inn is a split-level pub. The main bottom level of it was built somewhere in the 14th century. And there are no doorways, there are stone arches between little rooms where you went, and it's really cool. And then you go up the stairs to the upper part, and that empties out onto the main street on the split level. That's new, that was built in about 1810. In that, up on that upper level is a statue, bronze statue of Alice Keitler. Alice Keitler, and she is complete with a pointy hat and a broom and a witch's costume. She's standing up, she's about 4'6", which I'm guessing is probably pretty accurate in terms of height back then. And the story is that Alice was quite ingenious with poison and poisoned 4 husbands and got richer with each one. And it was the 4th one through which she inherited Keitler's Inn. So on the way back from that trip on the plane, I'm thinking about this and thinking of the storyline and thinking this has potential. And I wrote a limerick. And when I got back, I sent it to to Keitler's Inn in Kilkenny, and they sent me back a picture. They had printed out my limerick and they had pasted it on the wall over Alice's statue. And the limerick is as follows: a dame from Kilkenny had 4 husbands she didn't adore. Her name was A. Keitler, served poison each night, sir, and soon they were husbands no more.
Thank you. Thanks.
I have a question.
Okay.
Brian, to you first and then Bob. What is something that you find pride in about your writing?
I find pride in, I don't know, nothing specific. I guess, like Bob, I try to have an element of thoughtfulness in what I write. And for my character, Penn Wilkinson, the paraplegic attorney. I take pride in having written this character, I think with some sensitivity, but having written her so that, you know, it's not, I got some things to say about disability and about the, how people are treated and mistreated, but people have noted that, well, you're not preachy about it, it's just natural, she's just a person, she's just a part of the story, it's just a part of the story, she's just, you know, and I think the way in which I've handled that seems to have resonated and turned out pretty well. I am pleased with that.
Something that, repeat your question, please.
Something that you are proud about in writing.
Proud about my writing. I think there's two aspects of that. Number one is, as far as the writing itself, what I take most pride in, I guess, is the effort to bring social issues into a conversational light, so we can talk about them, and maybe we change a life or a mind somewhere. But I will tell you that this is a little different take on your question, Kathy, but one of the things that I'm proudest of is being a member of the writing community in one in Minnesota. We have this fantastic writing community, and in the mystery / thriller writing community nationwide certainly, even worldwide. There's a thing that is called BoucherCon. BoucherCon is kind of another name for the World Mystery Conference, where mystery writers and their fans gather annually. Last year was in San Diego. I want to tell you that for those of you who like mysteries, or just who like literature, and who want a really good time, and you want to meet firsthand some of the greatest writers of all time, and some of those of us who think we are the greatest writers of all time, maybe we don't live up to that quite. That's a great place to go. Nashville next year, by the way, toward the end of August. But I'm proud to be part of that community. I'm proud to have stuck my finger in that stew a little bit and stirred it. And I'm proud to meet people like Stan, like Ron, Christy, Chris, even Brian. I mean,
Who's that?
no.
And Rob, you should be proud of how you have people, writers who wouldn't even think that they could write.
That's part of it too. Part of the writing community is giving back. So I do. I'm involved in a prison writing mentorship thing, and that's really cool. I'm available to meet with anybody who wants to talk about writing, and whether it's to bounce an idea off of, or just talk about marketing or whatever. And it's just, for me, it's a pleasure. Beats the hell out of being a lawyer.
Yeah, I'll second that. Anything else? Anybody? Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about Brian's books.
Brian's books.
I mean, we don't have to.
Brian is really a great writer.
Has he been at Minnesota?
Yes, I bought your books.
Yeah.
That must have been the one time I went.
God bless you.
Yeah. So, I'm sorry if I'm making you repeat yourself, but I don't.
Brian wrote. You should say this, but I'm gonna, because you won't. I'll say it for you. Brian wrote 2 books way back when. One of which was a finalist for the Minnesota Book Award. And then Brian had some health problems. And it basically put him on the shelf from writing and doing much of anything for 10 years. And Brian came back from that and wrote his first Penn Wilkinson book. Am I right so far?
Yes.
Okay. And he has now written a series of books with Penn Wilkinson, a paraplegic lawyer who can't stay out of trouble. They're extremely well written. They're extremely entertaining. I have said to him multiple times, I do not understand why some people sell, get contracts in New York and have $1 million marketing budgets behind them. Christy, you can identify with this. Most of us can, and why other people don't. And the writing quality is not discernibly different. And for those of us who are not in the $1 million marketing category, I think that's everybody except Stan. This is how we get to know people. And I thank you all for coming. I mean, this is just awesome that you would take your time on a whatever night this is, Wednesday night, and show up and listen to us babble about what we enjoy. But back to Brian's books, they're great. Buy them, read them, review them. Oh, by the way, review books. If you read books and you like them, write a little 2-3 line review on come on, you come through here. Come on, sweetheart.
Sure.
Come on.
Oh, you want a cookie?
Yeah, have a cookie.
I should mention another thing you might want to do, Russ, is sign up for our mailing list. We both do a newsletter, and we'll have things coming out next year, things going on, and if you want to keep track of that, we'd love to have you.
I will have a sign-up sheet out at the glass table along where we're out signing books. So if you're not part of it, please do. It's one of the ways we stay in touch with all our fans. You gotta go, Christy? Or are you just standing up? Okay.
All right, now,
Thank you.
thank you, that was awesome.
Thanks for coming. Are we done? You guys had enough? Well, James.
I retired. I don't look like I retired, but I did. I retired almost 6 years ago, and I said to somebody I wanted to write a memoir. And I remember I got one of your books about how to write.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was reading it, and then I got to a part where I said, you have to tell the truth. I think I stopped right there.
James, that's why we write fiction. That's in a memoir, that's highly recommended. But when we write fiction, see, we can make it up as we go along. So
what I did was instead I went into beat by numbers, because I know I could start it and I could finish it.
Okay. And by the way, he's really good. So, okay. Anything else? Anybody?
Well, thank you so much, everybody.
Okay. Thanks a lot.